Welcome to today's video where we sit with Josh, our CTO here at Joyfill, to talk about PDF forms and the common hurdles that developers face when adding PDF solutions and functionality to their own applications for the first time. Josh shares some incredible tips to help developers avoid some of those long hours and headaches that we've faced in our own journey to mastering PDF forms. So with that said, let's dive in. Thanks for joining, Josh. Are you ready to talk about PDF forms?
Sure.
I'm excited to talk about this topic because PDFs are such a common thing for applications to support that developers and product teams are finding themselves more and more in the weeds with trying to deliver and maintain a viable solution for their users. So let's dive in to a few questions I'd like to answer for the listeners.
Okay. Sure.
When adding PDF forms and functionality to an application, how would you get started?
Oh, wow. Well, it really depends on what you're trying to do with the PDF. But if we're just saying PDF forms, which primarily revolves around filling out PDFs, mostly PDF fields, which are considered PDF annotations, first thing I'd be doing is looking for something open source. We use a React a lot here, so I'd be looking for some sort of React library that somebody built and it just gives me an easy way to embed the component, pass it a PDF, it renders the fields, and I can input data into them. Or actually more realistically, my users can input or fill out those PDFs. But I will say one thing is that that sounds nice in theory, but PDFs are this really ugly, gross standard that has layers on top of it. Sometimes it's just a flattened image. Sometimes there's not fillable annotations. So I'd say that the quick thing you're going to have to figure out is if you have a PDF that needs to be filled out, but it doesn't have the annotations on it, meaning it's just like an image almost, with it has all the little fields or a table and it's kind of got all the lines, like you can see where the data is supposed to be, but there's nothing in the PDF that actually tells you this is a fillable field. So you would have to consider one more thing if that's the case in order to properly handle all PDFs that your users might bring you is how do you make a PDF fillable if it doesn't have those underlying annotations that were added in some other tool or offline when it gets uploaded? So maybe you need some kind of drag and drop experience to place fields on top of the PDF. So that's another thing you're going to want to consider. But for me, the first thing I would have done is just be like PDF filler for React. And I would have just seen what comes up. Now I've done that before, so I know what comes up, but that's the first thing I would do.
Okay. Yeah, I think we just dived in, but
Yeah, that was a
and
deep tangent. Anybody that's on these calls or ever's going to listen to these videos, there is a very real tendency I have to just absolutely like go down a bunny hole that may not be relevant to what John even asks, but that's just how my brain works.
yep. I and some of these questions are more of the general questions,
Mm.
but I think we should probably clarify or preface this before going into the questions of what I guess we mean by PDF forms or why developers are wanting to add them to their solution, whether they're called documents or forms, reports. It seems like one of the biggest use cases around documents
Yeah.
inside of applications is PDFs. And I think what today's call can focus a little bit more on is the complex scenarios that go beyond
Yeah.
the traditional just show a PDF that was uploaded. This video, I think we could talk a little bit more about they got to generate data into a PDF. They got to take a PDF, like you mentioned earlier, it be uploaded into your application. And then
Yeah.
you want to be able to take data, whether you're filling it out manually or you're populating with your product data
Yeah.
into the PDF in order to generate an end result. And then have that PDF then on record,
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
searchable. So let's talk a little bit more about these complex scenarios that either people know are coming, that they know their users need,
Yep.
or they're not aware of yet, and they will. Coming from all that you know in helping almost a dozen PDF SDK implementations,
Yep.
what would you say is the biggest hurdle developers will face when trying to implement these PDF solutions, whether they know it now or they're not aware of them?
There's a handful, and again, it's a little nuanced depending on what your application is trying to do. But I'll kind of go through the levels of what you're trying to do and maybe where some of the gotchas are going to be through each one of those processes. So at the simplest level, there's like viewing a PDF. Um, you know, Likely if you're building an application, you're storing that underlying PDF. Even after a user uploads it, maybe you're doing it as a transient type operation with a file looking at their local file system, but it's likely that they're uploading it to your asset server, something like S3. So if you're viewing a PDF alone, there are good open source or even built-in browser-based solutions to simply view it. For instance, you could cache your S3 URL directly to Chrome and it will load up as long as S3 has permissions to allow that view file to be accessed. The browser will handle everything you need to simply view the PDF. Okay, there's some iframing based stuff you can do around that to kind of make it more embedded in the web page versus identical. Or there's open source projects like the one by Mozilla, which is probably the most popular one on the web, pdf.js to simply view. Where that breaks down usually is when you need to either one, read data off of the PDF or input data into the PDF. That's where it just goes from like 0 to 60 immediately. And there's really not a lot of good open source or consistent solutions around that. So if you're talking about reading data off of a PDF, there's two scenarios. One, either you're reading form data from the PDF annotations. You can think of that as a text field that is on the PDF. There are good open source solutions around grabbing annotations. Some of them are server side to read data from the fields. But if you're trying to pull like the flattened underlying text and labels, they are almost presentational elements off of a PDF that is not embedded in an annotation. That's when you have to use something like OCR. It gets very complex. OCR is quite good these days, but still unreliable depending on what you're doing. Um, so just simply reading data off of a PDF requires quite a bit of developer time and energy to just get data out. Same problem exists with data input, but it's even harder. So there's not like reverse OCR. So if you have a PDF that was an editable PDF, meaning it has those field annotations, there are some open source projects that you can use to insert data into that annotation where it exists on that PDF right now. But if you want to start dynamically like placing data in the proper spots, meaning it's like an image, it's not a PDF that was uploaded with editable annotation form fields. Now it's just like you have to use some other kind of tool because you really can't see or understand as a developer where those data elements are supposed to go, at least dynamically. You need a visual use case to be able to essentially like Adobe Acrobat or any other PDF editor solution that you can actually visually place the fields where that data is going to be pre-populated on top of the PDF. Okay, so that's like the main hurdle. You really have to do it visually because if you're thinking about that underlying background PDF, even though there's a square black bordered box, that data is all encoded in binary and you have no idea what the coordinate of x and y width and height of that element that's embedded in that background image is supposed to be so that text can go right on that spot and expand through it. It's very, very difficult, even with OCR. I've seen some of the best tools in this space try and use auto detection OCR for field placements. I'm not talking about reading text. I'm saying like using AI, using OCR to place fields. And every single time it's just trash. So if you're trying to insert data into a PDF, it gets very difficult without the use of a visual layer that you can actually almost drag and drop or click to create type experience using either your computer or something. So there's a couple hurdles there. I touched on three different things. Viewing a PDF's not the hardest thing in the world. It's simpler. Extracting data gets really complex, but there are solutions depending on what you're using. But either way, none of them are super good. And data input is another beast in and of itself. That's unless pre-created is going to be very difficult. You need to pursue some sort of visual builder that has a drag and drop or point and click type creation experience. There's a reason there's a lot of those tools that exist. So those are a couple of the big things that are going to quickly expand in complexity when you're thinking, how do I want to support PDFs outside of just viewing them? I don't know if that gave you a deep dive, but those are just some of the things that, from my experience, creep up on you when you didn't realize what you were getting into.
That was a good long explanation of kind of touching not only the viewing of PDFs, which seems to be the easiest part. The extraction is going to probably be your second hardest, right? But the ability to create a fillable form, take
Yeah.
a PDF and make it fillable with a good experience is probably the thing that's missing out in the world.
Yeah, if a user is bringing you a PDF, you have to really know what they're trying to do with it because it may not make sense or it might not make sense for you to go down some of these paths if all they need to do is simply view the PDF. So you really want to know what you're actually trying to accomplish so that you can kind of fight your battle. But one thing that I have figured out is I hate interacting with the underlying file itself, right? You got to deal with buffers and you're manipulating binary data of a PDF. And that's usually why, if you have any of these complex use cases, you are going to a commercial vendor. It's not going to be something that's open source. It's most likely going to be a commercial vendor. So that introduces all this weird wrapping around PDFs. Joyfill has intentionally decided we're going to use legacy. That's what we consider. The PDF is a legacy format that never was intended for the requirements of web. Without getting into this rant, I think in 10 years from now, the digital standards around native web experiences is going to replace a lot of PDF creation requirements and needs. But regardless of that, the goal is to get the developer free from having to deal with the binary layer. Because even though Joyfill doesn't support every annotation capability or manipulating the underlying PDF, most of the time, what people need to do is they need to support a legacy offline PDF, meaning somebody brought them a PDF, they need to be able to load it into view, see it, and potentially add data to it, fill it out. We don't support every PDF annotation, but we support fillable PDFs. So we say, allow yourself to support the structure, the visual requirements that exist. Joyfill is going to make it super easy to place data in that PDF, and it's all going to be done with JSON. So we convert the PDF to images. Then from there, we use a JSON standard to overlay data elements on top of the image. So once the developer has that PDF converted, they no longer have to deal with the underlying PDF. It's all just JSON manipulation. And when you're talking about data extraction or data input, JSON's super easy to do that with. That's where Joyfill is mainly trying to focus, is getting away from the binary standard of having to have all these really commercial or complex, heavy SDKs sitting in front of that PDF. And let's convert it to JSON and make it really easy to manipulate and use from there. We make it really easy to make fillable PDFs, receive data input, and extract data out. You also can store that data because it's JSON in a database really easily. You don't have to continue to read and write it from your S3 asset server because that's super annoying. You can literally just use the JSON like you do anything else. One more side to that is a lot of people see PDFs as the visual representation of the form, right? And so they expect their users to build a PDF locally or use some external source, and that's fine. But I like to think of it as only if that's the legacy world. If they need to create a new fillable PDF, then let's not even start with the binary representation of that PDF. Let's actually just utilize awesome web standards and JSON to build a brand new PDF if your users aren't bringing you a legacy required format that they have to use. Because what's going to happen over time, I believe, is as these other PDFs age out, which all documents eventually age out, if you give them a brand new standard, then it's like you're migrating them to JSON, to web standards, and then it can live entirely within your application and your database as JSON, which makes super easy. And if your users need to extract that as a PDF for whatever reason to store locally or to attach to an email, then there's an off ramp of this awesome new standard, which is web technology and or really browser based technology, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And you can download that to an off ramp format. I like to think of this as like, think of Figma. Figma does not operate necessarily out of a design file, like not an Illustrator file or an SVG. You can upload that stuff, but Figma almost maintains its own internal format. And Figma is being a design tool. If nobody knows what Figma is, it's essentially a design tool that can be created in the web or Canva or use any of these kind of design tools. You're creating a new data format standard managed by an application, and they have off ramps from that standard of a PDF or an SVG or a PNG or whatever format you need to off ramp to the legacy world or to an environment that doesn't have native Figma in it, right? You can off ramp to those other file formats. Well, that's the same thing we think about with Joyfill. PDF is an off ramp from a superior experience and technology that exists across web and mobile and lives in JSON. So it's instead of trying to support and wrap the legacy world and you're building everything around that, what we're doing is you are building a new standard, a superior experience built on JSON, which is like the easiest data format on planet Earth to manipulate and use. And you then support an on ramp from the legacy world and an off ramp, but you're not building around the legacy world. That's how Joyfill is. Maybe that's the main thing. We provide an on ramp. Bring your crappy old garbage binary turd PDF into Joyfill. Joyfill does everything we can to make it awesome and JSON based, and then it lives in JSON. So you as the developer are just sending it to your database, you're manipulating it in the back end, you're storing it in local storage, like whatever you want to do, JSON's super easy and universal. And then if your old, kind of an old school workflow or offline experience needs to be supported from your customers, you can then off ramp that again back to PDF. But you never have to deal with that consistent interaction with a PDF. It's just on ramp it once, convert it, now it's awesome. And then if you off ramp it, it's lame again, but still you can go ahead and do what you need to do. That's the main focus of Joyfill.
Very cool.
It was a lot of information tied up in one, but
No, I like that.
in
Yeah.
Joyfill, my like whole thing was a killer of the PDF. Because
Mhm.
if you think of local files, whether it's a Word doc or anything, when you bring that online, unless you're bringing it into like say like G Suite, where you're kind of just trying to support another Word doc format or Excel, those are not really built. They're all built around the context of this offline world, really. But then you had people that came in, like if you think of a Word doc, like Notion, they built this brand new interface, an awesome new like data entry kind of document builder experience. But what is Notion? You're not saving a dot Word doc, or a .xls file to your desktop. No, like they are supporting a new digital standard. And that is the main thing that we're doing as well. These are not on off ramps always to the offline world, but you're actually designing a new standard that you can export to the offline world.
That's made possible using JSON.
We do it through JSON. Yeah, it converts to JSON. And then we represent it using web technology and SDKs, and then also mobile native SDKs.
Right.
But because those obviously are not built on web. But yeah, because it's all JSON based, that's where it makes it really easy to insert, manipulate, and parse and pull the data that's powering that underlying document is all done in JSON. So it makes it really simple for the developer.
When you get on a roll, like we do when we have our meetings, that's the raw stuff that I actually want displayed
Mm.
because people don't passionately talk about it and they don't describe the what creates these headaches, what are the things that you don't think to even try to avoid until it hits you in the face. And
Mhm.
so I like that we get down to the really technical terms, the really technical things, because I think that's going to be what is most important to developers.
The challenge with like these legacy PDF, whether they're open source or whether it's these commercial ones, when you're building a new product, there's so much restriction around trying to build around an old standard. For instance, I like, again, Notion's awesome just because like we've all used Evernote, but then Notion innovated past it. Evernote just kind of abided by Word doc standard. I don't think they did anything unique there per se, but they just kind of gave you a way to organize it. Whereas when you take something like a Notion, they said, what is a Word doc and how do we make it better? And we're not going to necessarily design around a Word doc, or you can think Google Sheets. Actually, Google Sheets is probably even a better scenario. Cloud-based, collaborative, like there's a lot of awesomeness around having like modern SaaS product with the collaboration and sharing, easily accessible online, right? It's not even necessarily online, but it is definitely within the defined structure and scenario that Word pioneered on the offline world. They just created essentially a version of that in the browser. So I think that's what happens a lot of times with these products is that you're dealing with so many legacy PDFs that you have to support them because there's a lot of people coming online with them. But then I think there's this like hybrid where what if you could import a legacy document, but you didn't have to stay there? Like everything going forward, anything new would be like Notion. You could bring your legacy stuff, but then you get all the enhanced, awesome experience that you can build with like today's technology. It's not bound to that local file standard. Joyfill's at the very beginning of doing that. But if you fast forward a year or two, I think Joyfill's going to give you a way to create all that you could do in the legacy standard, visually represent information and capture information, but it's going to be in the new modern web technology and data standard that we all like to work with as developers, which is JSON. So yeah, I think that's kind of my big thing is design for, yes, supporting the legacy world, but even if you're looking for PDFs, what happens when a customer comes to you and says, well, I don't have a legacy PDF, but I still want to design some kind of interface or capability when a customer comes to you and says, I don't have a PDF. If you're thinking about designing a data like a fillable PDF, let's stay there because that's maybe more the main your topic. I want a fillable PDF. Well, what happens when the customer says, "Well, I need to capture data for this scenario that I have, but I don't have a PDF. Like I'm new, I'm maybe a new business. Like I don't have a 10-year-old PDF that I got to bring to the table." So the experience that you're going to have to tell them in this legacy world is, well, like go build one with Acrobat or go build them with whatever offline PDF tool you can use, then upload it to our SaaS application or our mobile app. But really, the best experience is that they can just build it right there in your product. So they can build a legacy PDF. And this is like a shameless plug because this is what we've done with Joyfill. You can bring a legacy PDF where you can support the legacy structure and text and requirements visually. But if they don't have a PDF, you can actually just build one right there in Joyfill. And what's kind of cool about that, it's all JSON still. Whether you brought your legacy converted to JSON, or if you're building a new one directly in your product, you're going to generate JSON. And where that's important is because anybody that's ever tried to build a complex PDF, you're probably not actually using Acrobat. You're probably trying to do it like in Excel and then export it to PDF because Acrobat's pretty, like if you're trying to create like a visual representation, it's pretty cumbersome to kind of create anything complex. Or maybe you could use a tool like Canva and then download it to PDF. You would probably pursue different ways. But then when you upload that, it's like, okay, great, it can abide by all that. So the nice thing is you don't have to do that off ramp. You just do it all right there because it's likely once you give that experience to customers or to your team, yes, their legacy documents will be created in that offline, or they will have been created in that offline format. But every new data collection or data representation document that they want to create going forward for future use cases and new business scenarios, they can create natively in your product, and you don't have to deal with that separate tool and the legacy file standards and all that kind of stuff because that's the better experience, keeping them in your product, allowing it to be all done right there. So that's kind of that's one other scenario outside of the challenge of how do you upload and view a PDF? How do you extract data out of a PDF? Or how do you insert data into a PDF? It's what happens if your customer comes to you and says, I need a fillable PDF, but I don't have a PDF. So you know what I mean? Do you tell them to go build one and then bring it? Or do you just allow them to create it directly right there? So that's another scenario that kind of comes into play when you're in this PDF world. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Those are some of the scenarios that you're going to be thinking about or you're going to encounter.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point that you're when we talk about PDFs inside of your application, it's not always as linear as just supporting PDFs. It's, well, what if they don't have a PDF like you mentioned? It's like, what if
Yep.
they want to have the PDF experience start in your application and
Yeah,
then end somewhere else,
exactly.
right? So that's a really good point.
And I would argue to say that most of the commercial leaders in this space around handling PDFs and Word doc type files from the offline to online world are all designed around the concept that they were created offline and you are simply modifying them in that SDK locally. But I don't believe they were ever conceived or built or designed around the idea of document origination in those SDKs. They're always around building something that supports and wraps a thing that was created somewhere else and was just brought to you. And it can make edits to it or circle something or delete something. But that building of a raw document that may be 1 page, 5 pages, 100 pages, is not really how they were ever designed. And you'll feel that when you get into them and start playing with them.
Good insights there. I have a final question, so I want to circle back just to some of the common hurdles that you had mentioned a little bit earlier. To help future developers avoid these common hurdles, or just to help them save build time and headache, how would you steer developers through that terrain?
Right now, open source is probably not your best route.
We know that you need to know what you're offering, right?
Yeah.
Is it a PDF viewing experience, or is it something more like a builder and filler experience? And then two would be to decide on a reliable PDF tooling. You mentioned it could be an open source library or not. It could be a more company-backed SDK. In that order, is that the correct order? And then what would be maybe a final step or two?
Yeah. If I was building it with the knowledge that I have now, I would use Joyfill. But I'll just say that because that's literally what happened to me. But I would first look at open source, right? If your requirements are there, yes. And if you are really just trying to fill out PDFs, then yes, you could look at a commercial option, Joyfill being one of those, and then just play. Honestly, just play with it. But it really is about understanding your requirements ahead of time and making sure whatever tool you're going to use does those things well, because not all are equal. Again, that's pretty high level and vague, but again, we touched on a couple things. If you simply need to view, well, then there's a lot of awesome options out there. But if you need to extract and manipulate, then that's another set of requirements that you're going to want to take into account. If you need to insert and programmatically populate via like server side or API requests or allow your users to fill it out, that's a whole nother thing. If you need document generation, meaning you need to be able to build ones from scratch in there, that's another thing. If you need to be able to display them only on web, or do you need to display them on web and mobile? That's a different thing. So that's a good set of requirements to know. But I would also say that is if there's another large product already in your space, this is maybe more to startups or companies that are launching this as an evergreen solution. Look at what they're doing to see a better scope of requirements, because if they're getting real world feedback from their users, it's likely they've extended or expanded their feature set to include a lot more. So using real world other products or other companies is always a good basis for that. But then yeah, it's explore the tools. Always start with open source because then it's free and maybe it has good support. Make sure the repository is maintained and has good support. And then if those don't exist, which it's likely you're going to run into a lot of snags just in this world, then look at the commercially viable options. But again, they're usually expensive and they'll lock you in for a while and they're pretty pricey. And so you want to make sure that before you buy that, you know what you're trying to do. It's hard to say because a PDF is like saying, how does a Word doc get created, right? Um, or how is a Word doc used in a business use case or things like that. It can be so broad and it can apply to so many different products and industries that you just need to know based on your customers how they need it. There's one more final point I would say. Sometimes when you're looking for fillable PDFs, you may actually need a form solution. So just take that into account that if you're still kind of locked in this like fillable PDF world, maybe actually it's better for your product to build a form solution. Joyfill also can help you there, of course, that simply exports form data into PDFs. Like you need to figure out what is really important, meaning, do your customers actually need to directly input the data to the PDF itself? Or can you present them with like a really nice, friendly form? Maybe you need conditional logic, maybe you need advanced validation, maybe there's just like great animations and styles and tips that can be added to create a better experience. And they simply need to get that data into a PDF so that it can just be downloaded. I would say make sure you're thinking about that as well. Do you need to directly fill out the PDF, or do you simply need to be able to download the PDF with data filled into it? Because then you might be designing a dramatically different solution.
Well, with those suggestions and those takeaways, I think this is a good place to wrap up today's call. Um, Hopefully people got something out of this short but insightful video. Thanks again, Josh. But until next time, see ya.
Peace.